In today's video, we are going to talk about 5 NFL players who might be heading to a new team in 2025. And by the way, these names are pretty big. Subscribe and like the video if you do go on to enjoy. Let's hop into it. So before we get into this list, I do want to hand out a few honorable mentions to some players that aren't on new contracts and might be going to a new team here soon. Obviously, Jaire Alexander just got released, so he'll be heading to a new team. Kirk Cousins is always going to be on the trade block. And there's a lot of discussions about Hassan Reddick. Those are going to be my 3 honorable mentions. Let's now hop in at number 5. I have Jalen Ramsey. Now, as of where we stand here with Jalen Ramsey today, it does look like at some point this offseason, probably within the next couple weeks, we will be seeing a Jalen Ramsey trade get done. The general manager for the Dolphins has already said he's going to trade him. We've already heard Mike McDaniel talk about it quite a bit, about how he wants to get the trade done. And for Ramsey, he's already talking about a potential new chapter. Now, Jalen Ramsey is 30 years old, but he's still playing some incredible football. Last year via PFF, a 76.9 overall grade, 76.5 pass rush grade, 85.7 run defense grade, and a 71.9 coverage grade. 40 solo tackles, 2 picks, 12 total pressures, and allowed only 46 receptions. Is he the Jalen Ramsey that he was when he was in his prime with Jacksonville and LA? Maybe not to the same extent, but he's very close to being still at that level. He's one of the few upper echelon, truly elite cornerbacks still in the league. Now, why would the Miami Dolphins want to get off of Jalen Ramsey? Well, I think it's pretty clear they want to open up some cap space. They probably want to reset that cornerback group as well. It's clear that the Dolphins are not a team that are seriously trying to contend for a championship right now. Yes, they might say they are trying, but their roster is not good enough, and they probably feel like it might make the most sense to get off of a bigger contract like Ramsey, because his contract does get quite big here in the coming seasons. And for Ramsey, it just makes sense to want to leave because he's in his latter stages of his career. He's already been super successful, but at this stage, it would probably be nice for him to go to a better roster and give himself a better opportunity to actually compete for chips. Now, for each player on this list, whether I think they'll be traded or not, I did give out 3 potential teams that should be a potential candidate for him to get traded to. For Ramsey, I had the LA Rams because they obviously have the same connection. They went on and did some great things when they were together. The Rams also could really use a true elite upper echelon corner, so I think both sides could make some sense. I also said the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys have already been kind of rumored to be having some conversations with Miami regarding Jalen Ramsey. There's a lot of question marks about Trevon Diggs and his injury history, so there's a chance that if Dallas does get Ramsey, they get off of Trevon. Maybe they could be some sort of a part of a trade with one another. And for the Cowboys, you want to have a consistent guy who can get you over that next level. Maybe Ramsey could be the guy. And then now recently, because the Green Bay Packers just released Jaire Alexander, I do think that Jalen Ramsey is potentially on the market for them. Now, I haven't heard much conversations about whether or not Green Bay is actually interested in Ramsey, which frankly I find to be a little bit interesting because of their current cornerback room. So I think they should at least maybe inquire about potential trades. They have the assets. I think they have enough money open for that. They should at least have some sort of conversations regarding Jalen Ramsey because he would frankly be by far the best cornerback they have on their roster. With all that said, I do think this trade will get down at some point. I think within the next 2 to 3, 4 weeks, we will be seeing Jalen Ramsey in a lot of trade conversations. And I think whatever team does get Ramsey is getting an awesome cornerback one for their roster. Moving over to number 4, I have James Cook, the running back for the Buffalo Bills. Now, the latest news on James Cook is that he has been attending minicamp, but he still wants to get a new contract done soon. It does not sound like either camps, both James Cook's camp and of course the Buffalo Bills, have really came anywhere near a deal. Like, they feel pretty separate from one another. And I've heard a lot of reports that there is potential conversations about what the future replacement plan for James Cook might be. Now, James Cook is an awesome player. Via PFF, he had 207 carries last year for 1,009 yards, 16 rushing touchdowns on top of that. Hit an overall grade of 82.3, a 62.0 receiving grade, and an 85.2 rushing grade. He's one of the more unique running backs because he's not just somebody who's going to be an every down, 3 down back. He can be used in multiple different packages. He's a very fast guy, has just good maneuvers, really good running back, shifty, can do everything you really need a running back to do besides, like, be a power back. So for the Buffalo Bills, with their more pass heavy offense, you would think that they'd be willing to do whatever it takes for a veteran like James Cook, who's now 25 and just now entering the prime of his career. But I can also see the perspective of Buffalo saying that we don't want to pay a guy as they're entering into that weird stage for a running back's career where they're 25, by 28, 29, are they still going to be the same guy that they were when we gave them the contract? So I can kind of understand Buffalo's perspective. I don't know the exact details of what the contract situation is. My assumption is that maybe this is a conversation where Buffalo wants to give him like a 3-year, I don't know, 60 or 55, whatever, $1 million deal. But James Cook is more interested in a long-term deal, maybe like a 4-year deal worth up to like 80 to $100 million, something along those lines. And I could see kind of why Buffalo would be hesitant to give him that extra year on his contract, because he's entering into a stage of the running backs where, I don't know, there's a lot of question marks about how much longer you seriously have on those legs. I do think, though, that James Cook, because he hasn't necessarily been a bell cow guy his whole career, you can kind of get by with giving him a longer term deal because you already kind of know what you're getting from him. And as long as you don't overuse him and use other running backs along the way, you should typically be pretty okay with James Cook. Obviously, the team knows how important they was. There was a quote made by Joe Brady, their offensive coordinator, that talks about how important he was to the team. But of course, Coach McDermott also says that they're not too sure what's going to happen at this point. So a lot of conversations regarding James Cook. In terms of 3 teams that I think could potentially be interested in James Cook's services, I have a couple of really awesome teams. I'll start off with the Dallas Cowboys. A lot of question marks with that running back room. Obviously, they drafted Jaden Blue. They took Phil Maffa. They basically overhauled it in free agency with Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders. None of those guys, though, would stop me in the slightest to potentially take a bang on a guy like James Cook, especially if he is willing to take like a 3 to 4 year deal with maybe a team option at the back end of it. If I was a team like Dallas, I'd be very interested in his services because he would give this offense something they just don't have right now. I also think Washington is another example of a team that could really use his services. Yes, you have Eckler, you have B-Rob, but B-Rob could be a bit more of that second option next to James Cook, who can be a bit more of that well-rounded guy. And you can take Austin Eckler off the roster basically because James Cook would do a lot of the same things. I mean, of course, you can keep Eckler because he's a veteran, but James Cook would basically take over that role of being the lead guy that can be used in receiving downs, can be just a complete weapon in the backfield, with Brian Robinson being a bit more of that third down guy, that pass blocking guy, somebody who can, get the dirty yards. And you just kind of have those two guys, take some carries off of each other so that both their careers extend longer. Washington is also a team that likes to run the football a lot because they have Jaden Daniels and, of course, B-Rob, and you add in a guy like James Cook potentially. You're looking at a dynamic there of 3 excellent running players and a lot more nuance to this offense. So I think it'd make a lot of sense. I also think Chicago makes some sense. Now, admittedly speaking, I don't love the fit of James Cook next to DeAndre Swift, but my assumption is that if you do take the flyer on James Cook, maybe you're then putting DeAndre Swift off the team or just, I don't know, kind of on the back burner. I know that his contract isn't ideal, DeAndre Swift I'm talking about, but this is a Chicago team that has a little bit of some open money to work with, and they can do some financial maneuvers to get this done. James Cook would essentially serve a very similar role to like a Jahmyr Gibbs, and then in the offseason, you'd be really looking for that David Montgomery. Of course, Ben Johnson, former Detroit Lions OC, maybe trying to replicate that now with the Chicago Bears. So I think it makes a level of sense. I'm also just not the biggest fan of DeAndre Swift, so anytime that I could find a James Cook over DeAndre Swift, I think you should at least consider it. No, I don't think he's going to get traded. I think this might be a situation where they play it out this year. Maybe they give him a short-term deal and figure it out later. We'll have to wait and see, but I could also see a world where James Cook says, you know what? I want to get paid. I'm not going to wait. I'm a running back. I can't have all this work on my legs and not get paid, so he might just hold out to the start of the season. We'll just have to wait and see. Moving over to number 3, I have Trey Hendrickson, and boy, oh boy, there's a lot to talk about with the Trey Hendrickson situation. This whole thing is really sad, honestly, because Trey Hendrickson has been absolutely balling these past couple seasons, and here we are today, and we have not actually gotten anything moving towards any sort of long-term deal. Now, as we sit here today, he is holding out of minicamp, and I have not really heard anything about like when we're going to get a deal done or a trade potentially done. It does sound like the Bengals expect him to be there because apparently I think he's getting fined right now, which is kind of crazy in my opinion. Now, I cannot confirm this, but I did hear a source on, I think, Twitter, and I think it was a pretty reliable source. I'll put the tweet up if I can find it. Essentially, what happened was Trey Hendrickson was promised a long-term deal if he had a good season in 2024. This conversation happened prior to the 2024 season. Trey Hendrickson obviously had an awesome year last year. I think he had like 17.5 sacks and was promised to get a big long-term deal done now. And after that successful season, they still have not been able to get a deal done. It sounds like Cincinnati is looking for a more short-term contract contract, whereas Trey Hendrickson is looking for a long-term deal. I also imagine that the money and the financial situations is also coming into account because Cincinnati is not a team that likes to hand out big loads of money, especially after they just paid Jamar and T. Higgins, not to mention Joe Burrow's contract. And it also kind of hurts Cincinnati when you look at it from the perspective of, well, Myles Garrett just signed a massive deal, and I'm sure Trey Hendrickson would like to get something kind of similar to what Myles got. Maybe not the exact same amount, but a similar amount. By the way, this is also affecting their first-round pick in Shamar Stewart, which is just insane. Shamar actually had an interview yesterday where he kind of just straight up blasted Cincinnati for not just his own contract, but also for Trey's contract too, which I think is a little bit crazy from a first-round pick, but I kind of see it maybe him doing this as sort of a leverage play to get the media involved and really have them put some pressure on Cincinnati to get the deal done with. Anyways, in terms of who Trey Hendrickson is and what the player he is, last year via PFF, an 88.1 overall grade, a 90.4 pass rush grade, and a 65.9 run defense grade. 22 solo tackles, 18 sacks, 7 assisted tackles, 2 forced fumbles, and played 823 snaps last year. Those numbers don't lie. This dude is a straight up pass rushing freak, one of the best in the entire NFL. And for a team like Cincinnati that has one of the worst defenses, especially last year, we'll see what they look like this year, you would think that this would be a team that wants to get a deal done as soon as possible with Trey Hendrickson, but they don't, which is kind of weird to me. Now, as to why this kind of holdout is happening, again, I kind of think it's just in terms of the years, the money, this, and that. Trey Hendrickson's probably pissed off with the Cincinnati team because you guys promised me prior to the season that I was going to get a long-term deal, but now you guys are taking back on your word. It all just seems like a bunch of garbage from Cincinnati's side, and honestly, from Trey's side, I kind of can't say I blame him. Now, in terms of some potential trade spots for him to go to, because I kind of think that at some point we're going to hear a lot more movement towards a potential Trey Hendrickson trade, because I do think they'll get the Shamar Stewart deal done with here soon. I think the Trey Hendrickson one might be the one that we just have to wait till the start of the season to kind of see if it gets done or if he gets moved. Team number 1 is the Washington Commanders. I think you'll hear me say Washington quite a bit in this video. They have a good amount of money still open. They could desperately use an edge rusher off the edge, and Trey Hendrickson just kind of feels exactly what this team kind of needs. Just a straight up pass rushing demon off the edge. They could use that. New England also makes a lot of sense. They also have a good amount of money, a first-year head coach. If you want to completely revamp this defense to be even better than what it already is, adding a Trey Hendrickson to a defensive line that could use an edge rusher quite badly, especially a premier pass rusher, I think could make a lot of sense. And lastly, the Detroit Lions. A lot of question marks with this Lions team as we head into the 2025 season. New coordinators, a new center now, and the edge rushing room isn't very good outside of Aiden Hutchinson. I don't want to say it's bad, but it's missing that second premier pass rusher. And if Hutchinson takes a step back from this bad injury he just had, it's going to be hard to get pressure off the edge. So I think Trey Hendrickson would make a lot of sense. Trey Hendrickson on one side, Aiden Hutchinson on the other. That sounds great to me. Now, in terms of what I think is going to happen, I do think that he will ultimately re-sign with Cincinnati, but I don't think it's going to be a short-term deal. I think Trey Hendrickson will either get his way or potentially get on a new roster in 2025. We'll just have to wait and see. Next up at number 2, I have Terry McLaurin, the Washington Commanders wide receiver. This one to me is pretty interesting because Washington did come into this offseason with a lot of money to work with, and you would think that potentially re-signing a guy like Terry McLaurin would be of their top priority, but here we are today, and that deal has not got done. Now, as we sit here today, he is currently holding out of minicamp and has not shown up. McLaurin also had a holdout in 2022 where he skipped voluntary sessions as well as the mandatory minicamp in that 2022 season before ultimately he would get that extension. As of right now, we haven't gotten too much word about how Dan Quinn feels about that, other than just him complimenting Terry and calling him a great player and so on and so forth. Deebo Samuel obviously has made comments about it because he's been in similar spots too. Terry McLaurin last year, 79.2 overall grade, 82.2 receiving grade. On 115 targets, he had 82 receptions and 1,096 receiving yards and 13 touchdowns. Now, I've looked up as much research as I can on this topic. I do not know the exact, what is causing this holdup between the conversations. It doesn't really seem like that's very public right now. My assumption is it just kind of comes down to Terry wanting more money than Washington is offering him. Terry is 30 years old, and at this stage, you do have to worry a little bit about that age number because typically when you get to that 33, 34 mark, you start to kind of fall off a little bit. Now, I don't think Terry's going to fall off anytime soon. He's just such a good receiver. His game is not based on athleticism or anything like that. It's more finesse and nuance and understanding. So I would feel typically pretty good about Terry McLaurin, but I will say when you look at the upper tier contracts in the NFL, the top 6 contracts are guys guys who are below the age of 28. And with McLaurin being 30, I could imagine that he probably wants a deal similar to those top guys, with DK Metcalf signing a deal worth about $33 million a year, CeeDee Lamb about $34 million, Justin Jefferson $35 million. I could imagine that Terry wants a deal kind of similar to that. Maybe not the exact same, but $31 to $34 million annually is kind of what I think Terry would want. And I could imagine that Washington's like, well, let's kind of hold off here because you are getting a little bit older, and we do worry about this deal being a long-term issue for our young roster. Now, me personally, I do expect a deal to get done. Terry McLaurin has been a Commander his whole life, or I guess not a Commander, but a part of Washington his whole life. He's been successful every single season, regardless of quarterbacks. He's consistently been loyal. He's done everything for this organization. I would be stunned and shocked if he ever were to get out of this team. However, let's just talk about 3 potential trade candidates. The Las Vegas Raiders could really use that alpha go-to guy next to Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers. Adding Terry McLaurin would be, in my opinion, an awesome fit. The LA Chargers, I think they could desperately use that go-to number 1 guy. They did draft a receiver. They also have Ladd McConkey and QJ. Adding in Terry McLaurin would be that veteran first option, and then everyone can kind of just fill into those next roles. I also think the Jets make a level of sense too. Terry next to Garrett Wilson with Justin Fields as the new quarterbacks could be a lot of fun. Again, though, as I stated earlier, I don't think this is going to happen. I do think Terry will ultimately just end up staying with the Washington Commanders. We'll just kind of have to wait and see on that one. But let's move over to number 1. We have TJ Watt. Now, again, similar to Terry McLaurin, I do not expect TJ Watt to get, moved off of, just simply because of his importance to this roster. And beyond just his overall importance to the roster, this is TJ freaking Watt, who has been a Steeler his whole career. And I think there'd be a lot of flack to the Steelers organization if they let a guy like TJ Watt, who has been very loyal to this team, just walk out the door. Now, recently, they did start their mini camp, and TJ Watt has not been there, and there's been a lot of conversations regarding that situation with, at one point, there was an Instagram story from TJ Watt with him holding up a peace sign in a Steelers jersey. So, TJ's maybe playing some mind games to try to get that deal done. I assume that this issue is just simply because TJ wants a similar, if not the exact same deal as Myles Garrett, and Pittsburgh is probably trying to lowball him to get a deal worth slightly under the Myles Garrett contract. I also think the Steelers should be very careful because Micah Parsons, who also is looking for a contract, even though he's probably just going to end up staying because he's been attending camp, they might want to hurry up and get that deal done with TJ, because there's a very good chance that Micah Parsons signs a $41 or $42 million deal, and now all of a sudden TJ Watt's just price keeps going up and up and up. Now, why would Pittsburgh potentially not want to sign TJ Watt to a long-term deal? Well, TJ Watt is a bit of an older player at this point. He's now entering into his 30s. Maybe they value the edge rushing position not as much as certain other positions, so maybe they're trying to open up some money. As you can tell, I don't believe any of this. I think they do prioritize TJ. I think it just kind of comes down to one side wants a lot of money, whereas the other side is trying to, hold back a couple $1 million to keep to their own. Now, TJ Watt, even though he is entering into his 30s, you would think might be falling down a little bit. The answer to that is just straight up no. Via PFF, a 92.2 overall grade, a 90.1 pass rush grade, and a 91.4 run defense grade, 35 solo tackles, 12 sacks, 13 assisted tackles, and 6 forced fumbles. Just straight up, TJ Watt is probably the best, if not the second or third best pass rusher in the NFL, and arguably is like a top 5 player in general in the league. He's just insanely good. And this Steelers team that relies on this defense, I think they got to get a deal done with TJ Watt as soon as possible. In terms of some potential trade spots, again, I don't think he will get traded, but I at least want to entertain some potential ideas. Number 1 is the Philadelphia Eagles. If Philadelphia just wants to go all in on, let's try to repeat as champions, let's go get the best players possible. We have a little bit of some money to work with because of our, lack of work in the offseason. Let's go sign freaking TJ Watt and have him just ball on this defense, and we'll be the best team, and we'll probably win like 3 to 4 straight championships with TJ Watt. Then there's also the Washington Commanders, another NFC East team. The same thing I talked about with Trey Hendrickson. This is a Commanders team that could really use a premier pass rusher. TJ Watt is right there, and I think they can get the money situation to work out too. Lastly is New England. Same thing as Trey Hendrickson. I just think New England could use that premier veteran pass rusher, and that's a rebuilding/retooling roster, so maybe they want to, quicken up the process by a few years by adding a TJ. Now, again, I don't expect the trade to get done, and if a trade were to get done, I would imagine Pittsburgh would want to put TJ in a situation where he can contend for championships, so I don't think they would trade him to a New England. I think a Philadelphia or a Detroit or a New England would, or not a New England, a Washington would make a lot of sense for a guy like TJ. But again, he'll probably just stay a Steeler. But you guys let me know in the comment section below, did I miss a player on this list? And if I did, let me know down below and I'll make sure to respond. And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.